William Kemmler, The First Electric Chair, 1890. When William Kemmler murdered his common-law wife with a hatchet, society wanted an execution that would send a clear message. New York had just introduced the electric chair, claiming it would be cleaner, faster, and more scientific than the traditional gallows. But when the current surged through Kemmler's body, it quickly became clear that theory and reality were worlds apart. His body jolted violently, his fists clenched, and his chest heaved as though he were still fighting to breathe. Witnesses later said the smell of burning hair and skin filled the room. Officials panicked, ordered another charge, and shocked him a second time. The so-called humane execution dragged out into a gruesome scene, forever marking the debut of the electric chair as one of the most disturbing failures in execution history. Margaret Clitheroe, crushed to death, 1586. In Elizabethan England, Catholicism was considered treasonous. Margaret Clitheroe, a devout Catholic woman, was caught hiding priests in her home. Instead of a quick hanging, her punishment was pressing to death. Boards were laid across her body, and heavy stones were stacked one by one on top of her chest. As her ribcage began to collapse, she refused to cry out or beg for mercy. It took 15 excruciating minutes before the life was pressed out of her. Even onlookers who despised Catholics recoiled in horror at the spectacle. Some later said her stoic silence turned her into a symbol of defiance. Margaret's execution was intended to break her faith, but instead it immortalized her as a martyr. Thomas Cromwell, the botched beheading, 1540. Thomas Cromwell was once King Henry VI's most trusted advisor, the man who helped dissolve England's monasteries and reshape the kingdom. But when he fell from grace, Henry wanted him gone. Beheading was meant to be an honorable death, but Cromwell's execution turned into chaos. The executioner, poorly trained and nervous, swung the axe and missed the mark. Blow after blow rained down, hacking clumsily at Cromwell's neck. The crowd gasped as blood sprayed, and the condemned man groaned in agony before his head was finally severed. Even Henry VII admitted the scene was a disgrace. Cromwell had enemies, but few deserved such a humiliating and painful death in front of the very court he once ruled. Robert Francois Damiens, drawn and quartered, 1757. After attempting to assassinate King Louis XV with a small knife, Robert Francois Damiens was sentenced to the most brutal form of execution France had to offer. First, he was tortured with red-hot pincers that tore chunks of flesh from his body. Boiling lead and burning oil were poured into his wounds. Then, for the final act, his arms and legs were tied to 4 horses meant to pull him apart. But the horses struggled, jerking his body without fully tearing him apart. Executioners had to intervene with knives, hacking at his joints while the horses pulled. The crowd, instead of seeing swift justice, watched hours of unspeakable suffering. Damiens' death became a symbol of how far monarchies would go to protect their power, and just how horrifying public executions could be. The hanging of Eva Dugan, 1930. Eva Dugan, convicted of murdering her elderly employer in Arizona, was sentenced to hang. Hanging, if done correctly, was supposed to break the neck instantly. But when the trapdoor fell, the rope snapped her head clean off. Gasps of terror erupted as her body collapsed and her severed head rolled across the prison yard. Newspapers blasted the event as one of the most gruesome spectacles ever seen in American justice. The public outcry was so intense that Arizona permanently abolished public hangings soon after. Eva's death became infamous not just for her crime, but for the horror of an execution gone terribly wrong. The death of Tawfik Yusupov, 1990s. After the Soviet Union dissolved, the government of Azerbaijan continued to carry out executions by firing squad. Tawfik Yusupov, who had been given a sentence for violent offenses, was taken in front of the soldiers. He crumpled to the ground, writhing in agony, when the first barrage of bullets tore into his body, but rather than dying, he slumped to the ground. Witnesses reported that he was still alive because he was moaning and jerking. The executioners, overcome with a sense of anxiety, were forced to reload and fire again, transforming the scenario into a drawn-out killing rather than an execution that was over in an instant. Later on, the soldiers acknowledged that the incident had disturbed them, and they began to doubt the basic purpose of firing squads. Yusupov's death was drawn out, extremely painful, and occurred in full view of the public, a punishment that lasted considerably longer than anyone had anticipated. James Rogers, The Last Wish That Backfired, 1960. James Rogers, sentenced to die by firing squad in Utah, became infamous for his final request, a bulletproof vest. The guards laughed it off and denied him, but the irony didn't end there. When the shots rang out, Reports suggest the squad missed his heart at first, causing him to linger in agony before dying. What should have been quick turned into a cruelly drawn-out execution. His joke about the vest, meant to make light of his situation, became bitterly ironic as he suffered a slow death. Rogers' execution is still remembered as one of the most bizarre in American history. Giles Corey, more weight, 1692. Giles Corey would not enter a plea of guilty or not guilty to the charges of witchcraft that were brought against him during the Salem witch trials. He had a desire to avoid the court's confiscation of his property, which would have left his family in a state of destitution, therefore he refused. Stacking stones on top of his chest until he submitted was the method that he was subjected to as a kind of punishment. Corey spent 3 days lying down while the weight on top of him continued to increase. His chest was caving in, and his body was gradually suffocating. Instead of choosing to surrender, he allegedly yelled, "More weight," when he was asked to enter his plea. As a result of his relentless refusal to comply, his family was able to keep their property, but it came at the expense of his life, which he forfeited in one of the most excruciating executions in the history of the colonies. Even after hundreds of years, Corey's story is still recognized as being both heartbreaking and courageous. Pedro Mata. The misfired guillotine, 19th century Spain. The guillotine was designed with the concept of mercy in mind, therefore it was expected to be quick, efficient, and kind. For Pedro Mata, on the other hand, it turned into a nightmare because he had been found guilty of the crime of murder. As soon as it was released, the blade became lodged halfway down, slicing into his neck but not completely severing it. The executioners were in a hurry to make adjustments to the machine while Mata was crying out and fighting against them. Again and again, the crowd watched in a state of fear as attempts were made to accomplish the mission. Something that should have happened in an instant became a bloody mess that took several minutes to play out. This failure damaged the public's belief in the guillotine, offering evidence that even a perfect machine might be transformed into a weapon of prolonged misery. Saddam Hussein. The chaotic hanging, 2006. The world was anticipating a solemn final act of justice when Saddam Hussein, the ruler of Iraq, was arrested and sentenced to death. On the other hand, his hanging turned into an event that was focused on revenge. Saddam was subjected to taunts and insults from the guards while he was standing on the gallows, and he continued to return their taunts with defiance until the very last second. As soon as the trapdoor swung open, his neck snapped. The smuggled footage from a cell phone spread around the world in a matter of hours. The tumultuous scene created controversy instead of closure. Can this really be considered justice, or is it simply vengeance that has been cloaked in the name of law? Even in the 21st century, the carrying out of death sentences could still devolve into chaotic and passionate exhibitions that left spectators wondering what it was that they had just watched.